Now, experts in the field, like Ben Flivberg, have studied which projects go over and budget, disastrously over budget, and which do not. And they've identified some common features of projects that actually stick to their budget without having this disastrous cost blowout. These are rare, but it can be done, and here's how. The first message is think slow, act fast. The idea is that you should spend a long time planning your project. Plan it in incredible detail, investigate everything, try different ways of doing it. Be very, very thorough and very time consuming. But then once you've got everything thoroughly mapped out, then build it really quickly. The building quickly is important because basically the longer the construction takes, the more chance there is of some unexpected event coming along, like a pandemic or a change in regulations or a change in government or who knows what, a war. So you've got a window of vulnerability because it's when you're constructing it that it costs a huge amount. So you want to keep that window when you're spending large amounts of money as short as possible to minimize the chance of a black swan flying in, some disaster happening. Planning is relatively cheap. That's a paper and pencil or computer exercise, and so you should take lots of time in the planning ahead of time to make sure you've understood all things that could go wrong, plan for them all, worked out all the details. Sounds obvious actually, but it's very hard. Very often there's political pressure to get something started. I think the idea is, let's say you've got a particular program, you've managed to raise money to build an opera house or something like this. The idea is that if you start construction right away, it'll be harder for other people to cancel it. Once something is underway, then you can worry about the cost. So very often politicians like to get it started as soon as possible because that makes it harder to cancel. And because it makes them look like they're doing something, it kind of feels more urgent. Yes, we've started right away. Push on, push on. Whereas people ask, yeah, sure, you want to build it, but why are you still, 2 years later, still doing design studies and concept studies and things? But actually, spending all the time to do the studies really right, really detailed beforehand is the way to go, and then build as fast as you can. A second thing is to work backwards from what you're trying to achieve. So let's say you're trying to build a bridge to an island. You might think your idea is, how do you build the bridge? But that's not the right idea. You've got to ask, why are you building the bridge in the first place? Is it because there's no hospital on the island, so you need some way for the islanders to get emergency medical care quickly? Is it to encourage tourism on the island or to encourage people to commute? So always start from what you're ultimately trying to achieve and then only then work back to how you do it. Far too easy to focus on what you're trying to do right now and not worry about the big term picture. So there might be other alternatives. You could put a hospital on the island. You can maybe have a tunnel instead. You can put it in the internet so people can telecommute. There may be other ways to do these things. And also, if you start designing the bridge and the cost goes out of control, then you can think, well, is this now the cheapest way to do it? Maybe we ditch and start with something else now that we've found the cost, because of our careful planning, has escalated so much. Again, it's quite a rare occurrence. People tend to get tunnel vision and focus on what they're trying to do without going back and asking the big picture question of why are we doing it? What are we trying to achieve? Then there's the question of why initial budgets are often so wrong. Now, partially this may be politics. It's often felt that unless when you're first proposing a project, we want to build a rocket, we want to build something, you've got to put in a small price because then politicians will say, oh yeah, we'll pay for that. And then once they've started paying, especially once you've started digging and started building it, then when the cost starts blowing out, the politicians are less likely to pull the plug. Whereas if you'd told them the true price at the beginning, maybe they would never have done it. So a lot of people say, yes, of course, people always lie when they're coming up with their initial budget estimate because otherwise nothing would ever get done. That's part of the story, but also people often genuinely think things are going to be cheap. And there's a discrepancy between two different ways you can estimate budget. One's a so-called bottom-up. Let's say you're trying to build a giant space telescope. You can say, well, we're going to need the mirror, and that'll cost so much and take so long. We're going to need the solar panels. That will cost so much and take so long. We'll need to work out all the different components, add up the prices, add up the times, and work out how much it's going to cost. That's a very natural way to do it, but it's actually a very bad way to do it because it never allows for unexpected things, and unexpected things almost always happen. The correct way to do it is top down. Say, okay, what was the last similar project that got done. If you're building a metro line, look at other metro lines that have been of the same sort of comment. If you're building a giant science project, look at other giant science projects. If you're looking at a nuclear reactor, look at other nuclear reactors. And then scale it from that. You maybe start with that and say, well, this one's going to be bigger, so it'll take a bit longer, or we've got more expertise, so we'll do it a bit smaller. But always start off with the most similar example you can possibly find. And what you'll find is that top-down budget estimates are usually way higher than bottom-up estimates because they allow for unexpected things. Classic example is renovating a house. It almost always, in my experience, ends up costing vastly more than you think, because when you start renovating, you discover there's asbestos in the walls, there's a crack in the basement, there's termites, the builder goes bankrupt. I mean, you don't know any particular disaster is going to happen, but some disaster is always going to happen and always going to blow the budget out. So if you've looked at what other people have spent to renovate their houses, yes, that's how much it's going to cost. That's far more realistic than a bottom-up approach, which assumes that everything goes well. Now, this is actually true for all sorts of things in life. There's an interesting survey where a whole bunch of students were asked to estimate how long it would take them to do various projects, and said, well, what's your 50% estimate, what's your 90% estimate, and so on. When you ask them how long, they'll say, they will often give, well, 99% confident it will finish by a given time. But when you come back later and say, well, how long did it actually take to do this project? Only 48% of them finished the project within the time they'd estimated at the start. They were 99% confident they'd finish it. So people's estimates were notoriously wrong. And again, it's the same thing. People are often saying, well, I've got to write an essay, that means I've got to write 400 words if I write so many words per hour, whatever it might be. What they should say is, well, how long did it take me last time I had to write a project like this? Yes. I think this is why some people are chronically late. They're thinking, yeah, it'll take me so many minutes to have a shower, have breakfast and get out the door, ignoring how long it took them yesterday and the day before and the day before that. A crucial thing is experienced team and a leader. And this is difficult for complicated science projects, but if you're going to build a metro line, hire somebody who's built a metro line before and did it well on time and on budget. All too often people decide they can do better than other people. The Spanish metro, for example, is much cheaper than US metros because they have one team of people who moves from city to city building metro line after metro line. They're really good at it. Whereas the US, everyone decides they're going to do it from scratch, all by themselves, and will hire somebody new who's politically connected. The result, the costs blow out. And another thing in common for some things that are economical is they're modular. We saw that solar power is one thing that doesn't tend to blow out its budget. A lot of the reason is it's not doing one very complicated mega project job. Even building the biggest solar plant is just doing a simple thing, laying down solar cells over and over and over again. It's modular. You're doing a simple thing lots and lots and lots of times rather than one insanely complicated thing. Building the Empire State Building, which for many years was the world's tallest in New York, is another classic example. You might think this is a one-off, but basically it was a vertical production line. Each floor was basically identical to the floors below, and the people started building one floor, and then they'd move up and build the next one, and they'd move up and build the next one, and as they moved up they got better and better and better at it. And so towards the end they were building 7 floors a week, whereas early on they'd taken much slower because they were still learning the ropes. So try and have a structure where you can do something simple over and over again, and that will help keep your costs under control.